Hello and welcome to another brand new episode of the Empower MEN1 podcast. My guest today, I am super excited to have on. She is a very special person in my life, happens to be my own mother, who has been with me through my MEN1 journey right since the very beginning up until present day. She is a huge inspiration in my life for very many different reasons. And so I was excited to ask her to come on and share about her experience and her perspective as the wife of a former MEN1 patient, the mother of two girls with MEN1, and she's also been through her own health journey as well. So I think she's got a lot of nuggets of gold that she might be able to share with us. So, Mama Amanda, thank you very much for agreeing to come on and share your experience with us today. I will jump in with my first question, which is if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about your initial kind of response and the emotions you experienced upon learning that there was MEN1 in the family. So right back when Daddy was diagnosed, and then when Catherine and I were diagnosed later on.
Thank you very much for asking me. I feel privileged to be on here and be part of what you're achieving here. So I hope I can add something. I'd never heard of MEN1. It first came to my attention in 2003 after your aunt, Daddy's sister, died very suddenly, and the post-mortem showed that she had actually been suffering from MEN1 and hadn't been diagnosed, obviously, which was very sad. As a result of her diagnosis, or post-mortem, it was suggested that her family, immediate family, were tested to see if they were carrying the MEN1 gene, and your dad was tested and was carrying it. So actually, it then put a lot of things into perspective, because he'd been suffering from various symptoms over the previous several years, which he'd been diagnosed with all sorts of things, including Crohn's disease, and they were trying to find out what was wrong with him. He was leading a fairly normal life, but he wasn't well, really underlying. So it's something of a relief, even though it was obviously a very serious diagnosis, to actually be told that they're what it was, and then the implications for our children, all of whom had been born by that point, there was a 50% chance that each of you might have inherited the gene. So we decided, we took some advice from a very very nice GP that we had at the time, who suggested that we maybe got you all tested when you were sort of pre-puberty or around puberty, and just if that's what we wanted to do. And we talked about it and came to the decision that we wanted to find out whether any of you were carrying the gene. So obviously, first of all, was your older brother Tom, and he had some form of genetic counselling beforehand. Not really. I mean, it was, a little chat. It was very difficult to explain something as complicated as MEN1 and as rare. But anyway, the test came back negative. Then that you were to follow a few years later with the genetic test, and unfortunately yours came back as that you were carrying, you had the MEN1 gene, and we didn't know very much about it. Amend was already going at this point, and we were put in touch with Amend, and so had quite a lot of advice from them, and we had some very good paediatricians, endocrinologists at Bristol Children's Hospital who took care of you, and so and the same when Catherine followed suit a couple of years later with her genetic test, and she also was told that she had the MEN1 gene. So so that was our first sort of few years of finding out about the gene and the implications of that, which in that first couple of years included your dad having a partial pancreatectomy, and then a few years later he had his parathyroids, or 3 of his parathyroids, removed. So so that was so then it was quite a lot happened in a short space of time, I suppose. In a few years, quite a lot happened in terms of, we weren't expecting any for you girls to have any symptoms quite as early as you did, I think. But nobody really knew. Nobody was really able to tell us. There didn't seem to be a particular pattern. So yeah.
That's really interesting. And I think the reason I love having you on here is you're the first first guest I've had on my podcast to be managing MEN1, not only as caring for a spouse, but also caring for 2 daughters as well. And you have your own health journey, which I'll come on to in a little bit. And I imagine, I think I don't appreciate until now how challenging that must have been as a parent and as a wife to be supporting that, the whole way through. I think sometimes we look at how difficult it is for the patient, and sometimes forget how difficult it can be for the carer as well. And in terms of those challenges that you faced coming through the different, stages of treatment, if you can talk to us a little bit about those challenges and maybe any strategies that you came up with to help manage the difficulties or cope with the stress or anything.
I think obviously, to keep it as short as possible, I would say that it's something that you sort of are almost thrown into overnight. 1 minute you don't know anything about it, the next minute you find out that your spouse has the gene, and then a couple of years later you find out, a few years later you find out that both of your daughters do, and then things started happening, like symptoms started happening. So I think it was probably easier for me to manage you girls because I'd been through with your dad what I'd been through. You were only quite young when he was quite unwell, so probably don't remember much of it. I think one of the things I found quite difficult was because it's so rare and it's also so complicated, and there are different aspects to it. It's not one gland or one tumor in a particular place. It's not, a lump somewhere that, somebody's going to have removed and then they're going to have radiotherapy or chemotherapy or something like that. It's a number of organs with a number of tumors, with many which are benign, thankfully. There are different types of metastases. It's just quite complicated, and it was quite difficult to explain to other people what was going on, and also to try and keep you girls from getting too frightened about it. I think it was quite isolating at times, but I learned how to deal with that by sharing. I actually found it quite helpful, and it's I suppose it equates to today's sort of blog, but in today's terms. But I used to email almost like a round robin email to my friends to keep them up to date with what was going on, because my life suddenly changed overnight because yours did, and both you girls and dad, and just to sort of because it was easier that way. It was easier to write it down than to phone everybody up and say, oh, this is what's happening, we've been back to hospital for that. I found that quite helpful. I haven't done that nearly as much as the years have gone by, but I found that very helpful in the first instance. And I suppose it is almost like journaling, but to friends, just so that, and then you can go back and sort of see what you actually went through, what you girls went through, what your father went through, and what I went through as a result of that. And it's quite it's good to look at these things and to see what we are able to do, what we are able to cope with. And I did reach out very much to, I have got very supportive, as you know, very supportive family. So, that's extended family. So yes, and obviously there's always been a MEND. I've always been able to reach out to a MEND for advice.
I know you're definitely someone who I've seen as an example of asking for help and support, which is something that I know initially in my life I found very, very difficult to do for whatever reason. But I think seeing you keep everyone updated with your round robin emails and reach out for support even maybe before you needed it is something inspiring, and that I hope when listeners are watching this back that they feel, that there's no reason they shouldn't reach out for help wherever it might be from. And even if it sometimes seems like the MEN1 sphere is a little bit sparse of support resources, that actually even just reaching out to a friend and asking for a phone call might be just enough in that moment. So thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to pick up on that point. Also partly because you've been through quite a health journey of your own and in your own right with your cancer diagnosis. And I wondered, having been through what you have with Dad, with Catherine and me, when you received your cancer diagnosis, how did your feelings towards health and disease evolve at all? And was there anything that perhaps you'd seen or learned from our experience in MEN1 that you then took forward into your journey with cancer?
Oh, very much so. I was totally and utterly inspired by you girls. Your two long stints in hospital. You and then Catherine had her surgery. I, I that helped me a lot to have watched you recover, and been through a journey with you where your spirits were down and then sort of tried to lift you up, and that sort of thing, and that was really helpful for me when I was in hospital for quite a long time as well, and remembering you and Catherine, and it just made me feel stronger, really. Yeah, made me feel stronger. I think in terms of, I think it's very different getting your own. It it's I don't think anybody can really relate to. I think it's a completely different feeling when you get a diagnosis for yourself than anybody else. Even if you're really close, even if it's your child that gets a diagnosis, or your husband, or your parent, the actual diagnosis for you is something that is very difficult to put into words. And there is obviously that place where most of us go to as soon as we hear the word cancer, which is immediately, for me, it was my initial thing was, am I going to be okay? Am I going to die? Is this curable? All of those things come in and sort of in the first few sort of seconds, and then, having already for probably about I don't know, 12 years been dealing with hospitals with your father and then with you girls, I think it was probably easier for me facing that than it would be for somebody who's never had anything to do with hospital. I also knew that whether it doesn't matter whether you're in the NHS system or in the private system, you have to keep remembering that you are important, that you have to get the answers, and you can't really wait for things. You've got to get, it's very difficult, but you have to try and get exactly the right balance, so that you're not phoning the whole time and people can't give you answers, but also that you're not allowing things just to happen. You have to be proactive in your own treatment, which I think is what you talk about a lot in your on your empowerment reels and all that sort of thing is you can't really afford to sit back, because you might slip through the net, and none of us want anybody to slip through the net. And it's not because any of the professions don't care, it's just that there are so many people, and it is, and we're particularly with, not so much with my cancer, but with MEN1, is it, there aren't a lot of people who know a lot about it. There are a few people who know a lot about it, and it's important to try and get yourself to see that right person, to see that person. It's also, that's not easy. So I think my yes, I think the impact of my diagnosis was that I definitely at that point was determined to get well and stay well if I possibly could, for you girls and for your brother, obviously. So that's I did occasionally feel a bit negative about it, but that's only natural. But mostly I tried to be as positive as I possibly could, which I do genuinely think I'm very lucky that I do have. I am naturally reasonably positive, but it's difficult if you're not naturally like that. You have to almost try and well, that was my experience anyway, that I had to sometimes, when I was fearful, I didn't, for you girls, and you were fearful yourselves because you weren't well, I didn't want to show you that fear. As a parent, it's quite important, and it might not be the right thing to do, but I tried to not show you if I was fearful.
I think that's a really interesting topic that you've just sort of touched on there, about it must be so natural as a parent to fear for your children, and also to feel their fear, and be processing your own fear at the same time, and wanting to set an example, and, as you say, finding the right way to do that. And is there a right way? I don't really know. I suppose every parent is just doing what they feel is best at the time. I can certainly say that I without a doubt think a lot of my positivity I drew from the fact that you were so stable and so calm, and very much unflappable. And yeah, I maintain that right up until now. So it's something I'm very grateful for. And you've preemptively answered my next question, which was, funnily enough, going to be about, balancing being vigilant about your health, with also that sense of, faith and trust, and ensuring that you also, you go out and live a happy life, and don't let this condition become everything, as important obviously as it is to stay on top of health. I wondered, given you have obviously such a positive disposition, are there any silver linings that you think you or we as a family, or perhaps you can even say for me, for Catherine, for Dad, that we might have drawn from this experience in MEN1 that we wouldn't have done necessarily had it not been something that came into our lives?
I think a very positive experience that is for us, and it's not like this for every family I know, because I know other families where, not with MEN1 particularly, but with other challenges, medical challenges. But for us, I think it drew us very close together as a family, and I think that I think. And I think as well, particularly that both you girls, have got MEN1, and so that's, even if you initially, when you were younger, possibly didn't talk about it much between yourselves, there was an understanding that you knew what each one was going through, each other were going through, and that I think that's sort of, there's a bond there, and even Tom from the sidelines, because he doesn't have the gene, it feels perhaps closer to you, because both of you, because of what you've been through, and I'd say that's, if you can really say there's anything positive about having something like this, I'd say that I think it's made us very close, and able to empathize with each other, sympathize, and maybe value our time together more than we don't take each other for granted as much as we might have done, maybe. So I don't know that. Of course, I'll never know that, because I won't have another opportunity to, we won't be disease free in this family. But I feel that very much, that's the case with us. Yeah.
I feel so too. I definitely think that there's a strength in our family unit as a result of some very unfortunate and tragic circumstances, but it's definitely brought us closer together. So I'm really glad that you've mentioned that. In terms of I want to say advice, which is what I don't necessarily like using, but if you were to have the opportunity to talk to someone who's maybe going through the same as you were, however many years ago, managing family with MEN1, perhaps you're talking to, a past version of yourself, and you could say one thing to them or give them one piece of advice, there's the word again, what would it be?
I think to use one of the phrases you use a lot, which I totally and utterly agree with, is listen to your intuition. Listen to that voice in you that's telling you when to push a bit further, when to when to sort of make more inquiries, or even when to test, even when to do the genetic test. I mean, that's not an easy decision to make. It's not easy, and I know in some families that might cause some confrontation, because but we definitely felt, your father and I definitely felt, that we wanted to know. Maybe if we'd waited until you were adults, you might have said, actually, we don't want to know, because that's what sometimes happens. But we were very much, we could never have known that both of you would have displayed symptoms at such a young age. At 13, Catherine was only 12, and quite serious symptoms. So if we hadn't had you tested, we would have been wondering. I mean, that's one thing I would say, is that and this is something that's is very difficult, that whenever you ever had anything wrong with you, to try not to let myself think, oh my God, is this MEN1? Is there another tumor? Is this blood sugar? Is this, calcium too high? I mean, and I still have to check myself with that now, that, or if there's fatigue, all the things that could be something else. But if you've got the MEN1 gene, and especially if you've already had symptoms, then it's very easy to say, oh, this must be something else. And that is the same happens with me with my cancer. I mean, there's an element of searching, asking advice from the professionals, and having faith. And those three things, I think, not everybody has faith. I'm quite lucky. But and also I've had very good access to the health professionals, but I've sought it out, and I think yes, but that's it's once you find out that your child has the gene, you can't ignore it. So if you choose not to find out, that's one thing. Once you've made that decision, and then your child will know, and you've made that decision for them, and they might not thank you for it, but it's a bit like anything that you do for your children. When you do it, at the time you do it, you're doing it with a loving motive, because you think it's the right decision at that time. It might not be the right decision for them later on in life. They might not thank you for it, but we could say that about any decisions we make. You know, as long as your motive is loving and caring, that's all that counts, really.
That's such a beautiful note to end on. Mama, I could talk to you about this for days and days if I had the opportunity. I find it very hard not to jump in every 5 seconds and agree with you. I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing so generously and honestly and openly about your experience as a parent, as a spouse with in the MEN1 sphere, but also with your own health journey as well. And I just thank my lucky stars that I've always had you by my side going through this. And I very much hope that anyone watching back might be able to take some sort of wisdom or learning and apply it to their own experience with this disease going forwards. So a big thank you to you. And I think yours is a voice that I'd like to have on here again at some point. So I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.